So I guess we can go ahead and get started. Thank you again for taking the time to join me today. I appreciate
Sure.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess these days we can't help but ask because of everything going on in the world. But how has your life been in the past year with the pandemic and with everything else that's going on? How have you and your family been holding up?
That's a good question. Luckily, we've stayed healthy. That's the most important thing.
Mhm.
It was actually about a year ago that my company sent us all home to work from home, which has never been one of my favorite things. I'm more of a get up and talk to people and quick impromptu things. So that was a bit of an adjustment for me. I've kind of gone through this grieving roller coaster of missing the office and working from home, but we're kind of getting the hang of it, I guess.
Yeah, it's a big adjustment period.
Yeah. Although I will say, I know a lot of people didn't have those options. Either they couldn't work or they had to go and put themselves in a risky situation. So I shouldn't I shouldn't bemoan it so much.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate that we left work on a Monday afternoon and we picked right up on Tuesday and haven't looked back. So
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I like to walk around and kind of bounce ideas around. So it's weird to not have that and to just be so disconnected. And you don't, online meetings are fine, but when you don't have those social, those cues, it's hard to kind of communicate, and it's an adjustment. So it's a lot different. But that's great to hear that everyone's healthy and doing well.
yeah, how are things on your side? Everybody staying healthy and out of harm's way?
Yeah, I'm a government employee, so I'm considered essential. So my work schedule hasn't changed at all. If anything, I'm working more, and I'm
Yep.
really fortunate because that's the case. And I shouldn't, like you said, I shouldn't complain. But my schedule really hasn't changed. It's a lot of the stuff that we had planned for our kids, like because we're homeschoolers and we had planned to go to Raleigh for a science Olympiad national competition for our kids, and all that got canceled. And we had plans to go to Ragbri in Kansas. It's a bicycle ride, or in Iowa. It's a bicycle ride in Iowa. So all that got canceled. So in that sense, it's been kind of weird. And I think our kids are taking it harder than we are because it's, like I said, my schedule hasn't changed, but for them, they don't see their friends and they don't, they can't do that kind of thing. So I think it's been difficult for them. So we're trying to keep them busy.
Good. Yeah, that's really the kids are really, they're in a unique situation because, I don't know, I don't have any friends anyway, so there's nobody for me to really miss. But
Yeah.
kids, they are so social and they're so, you get them in that groove where you go to your class and you've got this and you've got that, and it really it was an adjustment for them. We were lucky that our kids are of the age that they are fairly independent and took to it really quickly, and actually grades stayed up and adjusted really well. But I know there's a lot of other parents and people in different situations that this has been super hard for them. Like, I can't imagine having younger kids
Mhm.
and trying to keep the technology up and running and help them out and keep their
Yeah.
attention span. That's got to be crazy.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough for them. I was curious about publishing because I know next to nothing about publishing. So, how does a book get published from start to finish?
So there's a few ways. I'll talk about the way my books are published in a second, but first I would say there's the traditional route, which I've been focusing on, and it's always an option that I'm exploring. But in the traditional manner, you would finish a book, you'd do what they call query letters to literary agents and kind of describe your book, describe if you have any sort of literary past, if you have a platform, something that makes you a subject matter expert, and you try to get a literary agent interested in representing you. But literary agents are picky because they don't make any money until they sell your book to a publisher. So they make a percentage off selling your work. So they are looking for marketability in that, and they need to think of, all right, can I sell this? Do I know, is there a market for this? Do I know a publisher that's looking for something like this? and they're getting flooded with dozens, if not hundreds, of query letters a day or a week.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to stand up from the pack, and you have to have a hook enough that a literary agent says, all right, I'm willing to make you one of my clients because I'm going to go out and start selling you to the publishers to get you published. And then if you get a publishing contract, then they take it from there. You work with editors and they do all the publishing and marketing and get it out in the world today. That's not the route I've gone so far, but I have been experimenting with that and actually trying that with every new book I write, starting with my first book back in like 2001. I actually have a folder of letters and like physical correspondence, because that was how you did it back in the day. You had to print a letter, you had to print a self-addressed stamped envelope to put in with the letter, and then you'd physically mail out to these literary agents. And then somewhere along the way, they started taking like they had web forms on their websites, or you could send them an email. So most of it's electronic now, which is much easier because you can do like 10 in an hour. Whereas back in the day, you were like literally folding and sticking the envelope and all right, I got 3 of them done. Whoo, head to the post office.
Yeah.
So every time I finish a book, I will query it. I will try to get a literary agent interested in my material, and then try to get a contract. Haven't been successful yet. Been 20 years at that game. And so I decided, my first thought was, well, I must not be any good. So there was a period of time where actually I kind of stopped writing, started focusing on my career, my family. It was that period of time where I had a baby, bought a house, did all that type of thing. And then I started listening to podcasts, and I found some, I was really getting into podcasts about, TV shows and movies and pop culture type stuff. And I thought, I'd love to podcast. This is kind of cool, but I don't have anything to podcast about, or maybe I'll look for something to podcast about. And then I found a category of podcasts that are podcasts like serialized audiobooks, or for a while there was an actual company called Audiobooks, and they were authors that narrated their book and released them kind of episodically. And so I was like, oh, wait, I've got that old book I wrote, 7 or 8 years ago. I could do that. And so I decided to narrate it, figured out how to do podcasts, and put it out there. And thought this will tell me for sure if I'm crap or not. Like, the internet will be more honest than my grandmother will be. And I thoroughly expected to get trounced and told how horrible I was and how stupid I was. And almost within like a week or two, I started getting these emails coming in. And I remember at one point I had like Australia to Zimbabwe. Like, I literally had A to Z across the world. I was getting emails from people who were listening to it. They were excited for each new episode. This is great. And that put a lot of wind in my sails. So that was with this paper world. I'd had about 10,000 words of one-way written at that point. And so I decided to restart that. And that kind of got me going into the audiobook and podcasting. But that was all free. I was just putting it out there. And the only kind of payment that I got was people emailing me and tweeting me and saying, oh, I loved your book. This is great. And then along the way, people would say, can I buy it somewhere? I get a copy. And so I was like, I should probably look into that. And then that's when I started doing first ebook publishing, and then recently the paperback editions. So that's how I publish nowadays.
So, and when you were ready to publish a physical book, what was that process like? How does that happen? Do you have to approach someone to distribute it and to print it, or how does that work?
There are what they call vanity presses, but usually those you put all the money up front, and you have to make these minimum orders of 1,000 books or 5,000 books or something like that. And I didn't really have the money to invest in that. But probably, I don't know what the time frame is, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, these print-on-demand services came out. So you could format your book, upload your book, get it ready, and then as you sell a book, they'll print one copy. So you don't have to buy this stockpile. So that was actually with a company called CreateSpace, and Amazon bought them a few years ago. So now it's part of Amazon's publishing platform.
Part of the machine. That's
right. Jeff Bezos.
Yeah. So when you write a query letter and you send that out, typically how long is that query letter, and what is it? Is it a summary or like a synopsis of what your book is about, or how do you what do you do to kind of sell it to a publisher?
So it's a little bit of the elevator pitch, but it's not like you do like a movie trailer where you don't give away the ending or don't spoil the twist. You do usually describe it all the way through, including if there's a twist. There's databases of literary agents, so they'll tell you what they want, if they want a full summary, if they want 10
Oh,
sample pages. So typically you kind of start off telling them, you know, your this is the name of your book. It's 108,000 words. It's finished. Then you give them a quick synopsis of the book, depending on that's usually a paragraph or two, and then you kind of give them a little bit of background about yourself. So if you're writing about a plumber in space and you're a plumber, you'd say, and my background is I'm a plumber for X amount of years and blah, blah, blah.
oh, okay.
And if you have other like publishing credits or you would talk about that. And that's the general format of those letters. And then some will say, send me the query letter with a 5-page synopsis. And then you would blow that synopsis out more fully and kind of go chapter by chapter and describe it. And then, like I said, some will ask for 10 sample pages, 20 sample pages, or they'll say, don't send any samples unless I ask for them. And they'll come back and say, can you send me the first 50 pages?
Wow. So nowadays, does it help when you start to kind of pitch your book? Does it help to have a social media following? Is that something that you kind of, because I know like people, they talk about people who wanted to get into the music business, and it helps when they have a social media following. Is that the same for writers and for getting your book out there?
I think so. I haven't to this day landed a literary agent or a publishing contract officially, so I can't say for sure. But everything online tends to say it does help, or it certainly doesn't hurt. So if you can say, I've got this following on Instagram, on Twitter, I've got a successful YouTube channel, whatever the case may be, I think all of that helps, because if you get in the mind of that agent, they're thinking, I have to market this person. I have to be able to sell this book. And if they're an unknown, if they don't have a name like Stephen King or George R.R. Martin, I've got to find some inroads into marketing this book. So that's something I've been focused on for years and years and years, is just, using social media to make, in my case, I like to make genuine connections. I use it less for like, hey, everybody, buy my book, but just to kind of find people who seem to be book readers into the same things I am, start conversations, and just get to know people as people out there in the social media world. I think of it like, because I don't travel, none of us travel now, but I don't travel to promote my books, but this would be like going to a book event and meeting people and meeting people with like-minded interests. I treat social media like that, and then over time I've kind of gotten a good base of nice people that I chat with, and we talk about books and stuff.
Yeah, and it seems like it's less and less now, because people are so concerned with the numbers and not concerned with the interactions and the connections they make. So I think that's becoming less and less common for, people want the numbers and they don't really care about the quality. It's more about the quantity.
Yeah, I think so. And it's numbers I'm sure would be great, but if they're numbers with no substance behind them, I don't know how that would work. Like if I put out a tweet and it's, I might have 100,000 people, but if they don't have a personal connection to me, are they really going to pay attention to that tweet as much as it's like, oh, hey, Jeff tweeted, and they've had a connection with me.
Yeah, that's more fulfilling. It seems like, to have that personal connection, or at least somewhat of a connection, that when they do acknowledge that you're working on something, you said something, that it means something. It's not just a click of a mouse and they move on to something else.
That's my take. Like, if you like my books, great, and you're a fan of the books, great. But if you like me, that's just as good to me. Like if you have a connection to me, and even if you don't buy my books, but we can talk about somebody else's books, or whatever the case may be, that's very fulfilling in the social media world to me.
Yeah. So when did you know that you wanted to become a writer, or at least when did you find that? When did that start to kind of develop for you?
I don't think I think I wanted to be a writer before I knew I wanted to be a writer. I was throughout high school and kind of post high school, I was focused on becoming a filmmaker.
Oh,
And
okay.
so in high school, I would do a lot of writing. Um, when I look back on it, I didn't think of myself as being a writer at the time. I was just writing because it was fun, and I would write like little superhero stories and vigilante stories, and I would and out of my friends and I that were making videos, and this was back in the day of like VHS, and you edit your video by hooking up two VCRs
Yeah.
together, and I was writing the scripts only because I was the I was the one that was going to do that. Like, hey, let's go shoot a movie. All right, I'll write up a script. Let's do it next week. And I'll quickly write some like action hero kind of thing, and we'll go shoot it. So I was writing with it. It was kind of like a means to an end. Like I wanted to make movies, but you have to have something to make a movie about. So I would write to get there. And then after college, when I moved back to Maine, Maine isn't the hustling and bustling metropolis of movie making and television production that you might think it is. Um, so I didn't, my day job was in banking, and so I still wanted to create, but didn't have a studio, didn't have cameras and all that stuff. I still needed to have an outlet for these stories that were running around in my head. So I pulled up a blank document. I think it was ClarisWorks at the time, on an old iMac, and I just started writing. And then I was like, and then I wrote something. I had no beginning, middle, or end in mind. I just kind of one day started writing, and then realized, oh, this could be a pretty good story, and ooh, this is getting longer, and this is getting bigger. And every night I would go to bed and I would be thinking about what's the next part of the story, what's the next part. And that's how This Paper World came about in the beginning of the Champion saga. And then I realized I had a novel, and I was like, "Ooh, I have written something with chapters and over 100,000 words." And that's when it kind of clicked. Like, "Ooh, I'm writing. This is what I'm doing now."
So was it This Paper World that you narrated on the podcast?
Yes, that was the first one. So I did This Paper World. Then the response to that got me back into writing. So I wrote One Way, did that as a podcast, and people were clamoring all the time for a sequel to This Paper World, and so I wrote This Burning World, and kind of just kept going from there.
Oh, awesome. There's a lot of people on Twitter and YouTube that are I think they call it the writing community, and a lot of them often ask advice for aspiring writers. What advice would you give to an aspiring writer, or even to yourself, if you can go back in time and give yourself advice and say, this is what you should avoid, or this is what you should focus on? What would that be?
I would say just start writing. I think a lot of people think writing is this big thing they have to prepare for or have to get ready for, and I think they think there's some gauntlet they have to pass through to call themselves a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, if you write, then you're a writer, and just start. Pull up that Word doc, open up a notebook, or however you want to write, and just start putting words out there. And don't worry about it being, don't think I am writing the next Harry Potter. I am going to be the next J.K. Rowling. Don't worry, just write, because you're writing a story that's fun for you to write. Write something that you'd go pick up off a bookshelf, but don't worry about, then I got to go find an agent, and then I got to get a publisher, and I got to do cover art. Don't just write. Just write. Don't be intimidated by the blank Word document, and don't be intimidated by the process. If you want to outline first, great, outline. But if you don't, just start writing. If you want to create character summaries and fully flesh out a character's background, which is going to be backstory that it isn't really in the book, but you're going to put it, fine, do that, or don't. Like, there's no rules. Just write. And then the second thing I would say to people who are writing is momentum. Like, writing has this momentum. It's like pushing a heavy box across a floor. Like, it takes a while to get it going, but keep it going. Keep that
Mm.
momentum going. If it starts to slow down, it will be hard to start up again. Whereas if you keep it going, it kind of, creates its own momentum. And I've found that several times in my life where if I write a little bit every day, the word count keeps adding up. If I take a day off and then, well, it's the weekend and then I've got this hair appointment and, or whatever the case may be, you start to string together these days where you're not writing. And then when you think about picking it back up again, you're like, geez, I don't know where I left off and I got to go back. And so keep momentum going would be what I would tell people who are starting to write. Don't let those days off string together. Put a few words down on paper. Even if you've got 15 minutes, bang out 100 words just to keep it going.
How hard is it to keep momentum going when you kind of hit those roadblocks and those dead ends? What did you tell yourself to kind of keep motivated and keep momentum going? What are some of the ways you did that?
Well, one trick I would have is I would go back and I would read some of what I'd already written. That tends to re-prime the pump. And a lot of times, especially if you think this really isn't going anywhere, it's kind of floundering, and then you go back and read what you've written. Most times, 9 times out of 10, I read that and I go, I wrote that? That's pretty good, actually. And you kind of reinvigorate yourself with that process. That, going back and refamiliarizing yourself with your story, kind of helping to pick up the thread and keep moving on. But also the second thing, I got some good advice early on, is don't believe in writer's block. Like a lot of people I get a lot of, writers ask me, what do you do when you get writer's block? Or do you worry about writer's block? And I've never really had it because early on someone told me, just don't believe in it. It doesn't exist. It's like a batter in baseball worrying about a slump. Like, just don't. Like, just keep writing. So if you wonder where the story is going next, one trick I would do is just have a conversation between 2 or 3 characters. Like if I couldn't figure out how to get to the next milestone in terms of plot wise, then just have a dialogue, have a conversation, and then just keep that word flow writing, that story writing. And what that will do is we'll spin out some character moments for you, or we'll give you time to let it simmer enough in your brain that the next plot point does come. And then boom, you're off to the races. So it's don't worry about writer's block. Don't let it get in your head. Just keep writing.
It's interesting. I think that's a good approach to that. It sounds simple, but I think a lot of people, it's kind of like a boogeyman that they get in their head, and it kind of takes on a life of its own when like you said, it's not even there, or it should, you can avoid it.
Yeah. And I also, with my projects, I tend to let them kind of germinate in my head a while before I start writing. So I don't really do outline. I guess I'm what they call a seat of the pantser, like just kind of let it flow. But what I do get is kind of the nucleus of the idea. And then I come up with a little bit of a beginning, middle, and maybe an end, but I don't necessarily have to know the end before I get started. And so as long as you've got kind of the core idea, some major mile markers along the way, and then all the rest is just connective tissue. Like if I know I want to have, I've got this, I'll give you a good example. The one way, the core of that idea, the germ of that idea was one night I was driving home from work. It was late at night. I stopped to get gas. It was kind of a summer night. The wind was kind of blowing. It kind of blew through my hair. I heard a dog bark in the background, and it had a very almost Steven Spielberg adventure kind of quality to the night. So I was thinking, like, well, what kind of adventure would happen? Like, what could happen on a night like tonight? And then I pictured this time travel scenario, and I always loved time travel, but this was a time travel scenario not seen through the eyes of the time traveler, but someone who is being visited by the time traveler. So a time traveler coming to someone and telling them this fantastic story of, look, I'm from the future, and we got to do this. And so that was the germ of the idea of One Way. And then it just kind of, and then I started letting that sit in my brain and thinking of, mile markers. And another big image that came to my mind was running across the frozen lake. Like,
oh, okay.
The idea of having to run a great distance with no cover. like nothing to hide behind, no rock, no car, no tree to get behind, and someone's shooting at you. Like, how terrifying was that idea? So that was an image that came to my head that I said, all right, I've got to go somehow from guy pumping gas and getting visited from a time traveler to being out in the middle of a lake and having someone shoot at your back while you're sprinting for your life. Like, so there was two kind of visual elements in my head, and then I kind of created little mile markers in between, and then just boom, now I have to connect the dots. I just got to make that connective tissue in between these images that I had in my head.
So when these ideas germinate and you have these mile markers in your mind, how often do you change those key moments as you connect that tissue? How often does those major moments change, or do you try to not deviate too much from those?
Quite a bit, actually. The winter setting was kind of a reboot. When I did that reboot of One Way, was I'd written the first 8,000 or 9,000 words, and it was summer. So in that first opening scene, Barry's out washing his car, not shoveling his driveway.
Right.
So it wasn't. So I had something completely different, kind of, running through the woods and all this stuff in my head. And then when the image of the frozen lake came to my mind, I said, oh, back up, rewind. It's now winter, and so I will do stuff like that occasionally. In This Paper World, I had a vision of the big battle scene being, for some reason, I just had a vision of someone picking up like an American flag that had like one of those like pointy tops at the beginning, at the top of a flag stand, something you'd see in an auditorium or something, that size flag with a flag stand, picking that up and like stabbing someone with it. So I had this vision. That was one of my mile markers of like, how do I get to that point? And then I ended up not using that element, at least I haven't so far. But I never used that in the story. But it did lead me to an auditorium scene. So now I've.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that kind of you let that kind of guide you through the story, through the process.
Absolutely. And the only time I've ever done any sort of outline was in One Way, because when I got halfway through it and I knew kind of where the ending was going to be, I realized it had multiple time streams running, and I wanted to have some emotional beats that kind of matched up. So I had this little blue index card that I just kind of wrote what each of the three narratives was doing. There's the night of the murder, Barry and Jenny. There's Jenny and Dr. Vanderven, and then there's the bad guys, Jeremiah and Rodney.
Right.
Jedediah and Rodney.
Jedediah,
sorry. Yeah. And so I kind of had to like make sure I knew I had something that I wanted to happen in each of those narratives, but then I kind of wrote them out and then lined them up. So I knew that the cliffhanger from Jedediah and Rodney's time stream would line up with this thing in the Jenny and Dr. Vanderven narrative. That's the only time I kind of had to put pen to paper to kind of like outline like that. But the rest of them, I just kind of keep going in my head.
Well, I was impressed with the way that you ended the chapters, and it always wanted me to keep reading. And I wondered how difficult that was to keep all those different timelines together and where the characters were, and just to keep the reader engaged like that, because every chapter I finished, I wanted to keep going. I didn't ever want to stop, because I knew I wanted to know what would happen with this timeline, but I knew it was a chapter or two away. So I had, and I wanted to know every timeline. So I wanted to know what happened to Barry and Jenny, but I also wanted to know Jenny in the future, so that was really a good job. And I wondered how you kept all those timelines, how you kept all of them straight, and how you lined them up in the book. That was pretty well done.
Little blue index card.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the first book I wrote with podcasting in mind. So when I'd written This Paper World, I didn't know what a podcast was, so that was just kind of happenstance how those chapter breaks happen. When I wrote One Way, I was thinking episodically. I was thinking from week to week, how do I keep someone coming back? Or how, if the podcast has already been released, how do I get someone to keep downloading that next episode? And when you get into the podcast, And if you look at One Way, the first chapter is pretty long, and I think it's just Barry and Jenny.
Mhm.
And then it starts breaking into, I think, the Jenny Vanderven and Barry and Jenny Night of narratives back and forth. And then eventually you bring in the Jedediah and Rodney. So you have those kind of three rotating narratives going through. And so when you listen to the podcast, most of the episodes, once you get into it, are all three narratives. So every episode gave you a little bit of Barry and Jenny, a little bit of Jenny and Vanderven, and a little bit of the bad guys, and it would kind of rotate in the same order through each week. So I was very much, even though I was writing a novel, I was very much writing with another medium in mind at the time. And I think that helped me kind of really figure out where to end on some cliffhangers to kind of keep that, tune in next week kind of vibe to it.
Did your earlier experience with writing scripts and kind of playing around on VHS, did anything from those days help you with that process on keeping the listener engaged like that?
I think so. I think because I started off wanting to be a filmmaker, I'd studied a lot of kind of 3-act structure and the Star Wars trilogy and George Lucas's kind of ring theory and Spielberg's kind of style in essence. So when I write, I always thought of this as a movie in my head first, and I think so I kind of think in cinematic kind of visual things and then trying to get it out on paper that way. So there's probably, if you were to line it up, it probably has a very kind of movie kind of arc to it. At least I hope so. Or that's probably kind of embedded in the DNA because I've been a movie fan since I can remember.
What kind of movies what are your favorite movies, or what movies do you kind of gravitate towards?
I like a lot of anything kind of sci-fi-ish. So, my favorite movie of all time is Back to the Future. Saw that on the night before my 10th birthday, and my brain exploded and my life changed forevermore after that. But just love all the Star Wars movies and Indiana Jones and even some of the kind of popcorny action type things like The Rock and Con Air and those types of fun kind of romps. I love those. I love comedies too. I don't know if I could write comedy very well. My brother's the funny one in the family, so. But I love really any movie, especially any movie that's entertaining. More of like a popcorn blockbuster type movie. I'm not too much of an art house kind of snob, but I certainly appreciate them. Kill Bill is another good one. Good stylistically, but also action and fun dialogue and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is. That does have a good balance to it. Tarantino.
Yeah. So
when you write a book and you have your work, is it nerve-wracking to let it go out into the world and let everybody read it? Is that what does that feel like to have your work that you've worked so hard on kind of let it go out into the world and let everyone critique it, and you're going to hear, I'm sure you hear good and bad no matter who you are, but is that weird or is that difficult?
It's very exciting for me. I like it. I think because I kind of steeled myself early on, like when I first released this Paper World, I assumed it was going to be universally hated, and I was going to hear what an idiot, moron, hack I was. Now I should never pick up a pen again. That was my attitude going in. I just assumed that was going to be, because that's what the internet does, right? You read any comment on any platform, whatever, just people anonymously can rip other people apart. So right. I kind of went in a cynical fashion thinking that would happen. And when it didn't, when I realized people were kind, liked what I was putting out there and responding positively, ever since then, I've been excited to get it out. Like almost like I would prematurely want to release little bits of a story or something like that. Like it just, I get to these points where I'm like, I just want to get this out. I want people to read it. And that was kind of when I write something now, I go through, I have patience. I try to tell myself to have patience, and I go through the process of getting all the editing done, doing the queries to the agents, giving that as much time as it probably deserves. I'll usually spend 3 to 5 months querying, get a couple hundred rejections back, and go, all right, done. Now let's get it out there. Let's get it out to people who can actually enjoy it. And then that's the fun part. And I always put it out there. I'm like, I can't wait to start hearing what people think. Come on. And then it like trickles in, people start giving you reactions. And then it's just the most gratifying thing when people come back, and whether it's reviewers like you or just people that I've met through social media that just tell you that they like your work. It's like, that's it. That's worth it. I'm done. I can die happy now. You liked it.
Yeah, that's awesome. From when you start to let those ideas germinate for a book, typically how long does it take you to write a book from start to finish? Or do you kind of have it in your mind that you want to, like, do you give yourself a target, or do you just kind of let those main points and that tissue develop on its own?
A little bit of both. Like when I start a book, I'll say this one, especially now that I've got a few under my belt, I can kind of gauge how long it's going to be. So I'll say, I feel like this one's going to be in the, like, one way I knew was going to be in the 85 to 90,000 word range. But that's where I was kind of shooting for it. And then I'll set like monthly word count goals, and then I'll break that down into weekly, and I'll know if I'm falling behind. So I got to like catch up. And then if I have a really good day, like if I have a day where I write like 2,000 words in a day, I'm like, whoa, look at me. I'm like, that's like a fifth of my whole monthly goal. Yay. It will take me typically in most of my books, it's taken about a year-ish, maybe 10 months to a year to write the first draft. And that's kind of based on a budget of around 10,000 words a month. When I got into this Champions World, which is the latest, it's the last champion novel that I've written. That one in my head, so I knew the first book was, I think, 110,000 words. Second book was like 90,000 words. I'm probably not getting this exactly right. So I was like, this one's going to be big. It's the finale of a trilogy. It's going to be a little bit bigger. So it's 125,000 words is kind of where I had in my head. Then the story kind of went and went and went. And I'm like, I'm going to pass 125, maybe 150. All right, I'll wrap it. I'll bring it in for a landing around 150. And that didn't happen. And in the end, that one turned out to be like 185,000 words. But that was just the story that needed to be told. And so that one actually took almost 2 years, start to finish, from when I started writing it. But that was where I kind of really, the lessons of that momentum concept really came to me. There were periods of time where I kind of let the momentum peter out, and then kind of let it sit for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and then like huge struggle to get it started again, and then keep it going. Mm-hmm. That one I also decided to experiment with using like voice dictation, trying speech to text. I was trying to find ways that I could maybe speed up the process a little bit. It doesn't help. For me, it was always, it was misspelling words or mishearing words. So I spent just as much time going back and fixing it than I would, So at about like the 2/3 way, I was like, forget it. And I just went and finished it off. Regular typing.
Back to the old way, huh?
Yeah.
Do you give yourself a schedule to devote to writing, or like you just kind of mentioned it, but do you kind of set aside a certain amount of time in the day to focus on it and to have that and no distractions?
I tried that for a while, but then I found, like, if I said, all right, I'm going to write for 45 minutes before I leave work or something like that, like before I shut down for the night. And then if that time goes away, then I've lost that day to writing. So what I've kind of said instead is just write when you can, and don't worry about having an hour block. I used to do that too, like set aside an hour block, make sure you've got a solid hour to write. But then if someone like grabs you and it takes longer, then you only have half an hour, then you go, well, I can't do much in a half an hour. So this day is gone. So I kind of got away from any sort of structure like that. And I said, find time to write, and then get those word count goals and try to hit them however you can. And if you only have 20 minutes to write, then write for 20 minutes. Maybe you get an hour tomorrow, but don't give yourself too many rules. Then you find life doesn't let you stick to those rules.
Yeah, That's good advice. Is there anybody that you bounce your ideas off of as you're developing stories and as you're writing? Do you have someone in particular that you have read your work and kind of will critique you and be honest with you and let you know what works and what doesn't work?
Not usually in the process of writing. When I have my ideas, I I let them be my ideas. After I'm done, usually I'll share my drafts with um, either like my brother. He's probably my biggest beta reader. I'll send it to him, and I don't know if he's honest or not, but he certainly gives me feedback and he's not one to like point out and go, "Oh, you really should have had this character do this," or "This wasn't really that much of a surprise." Like he's just very positive and tells me what he likes about it. Um, and so I haven't had too many people that have tried to like reshape what I've written or um, give me critical advice that takes the story in a different direction. Usually it's I wait till it's done, I give it as kind of a pretty much finished product, and then I just kind of let them give me their feedback. I'm certainly open to any critical feedback, but most people are pretty kind and they read it as a story and they go, "Yep, I like this story. This worked for me," and they tell me what they liked about it.
Hmm. So when you're not writing, what do you enjoy doing other than watching movies and, of course, spending time with your family?
That's pretty much it. I read other people's stuff. Like, I work around the house. Try to do housework, and my career is pretty involved. My day job, I should say, is pretty demanding and pretty involved. So that those can sometimes be 50, 60 hour weeks. So those are. It's funny. I almost can find times in my life where writing was an era in my life. I was writing for a year, and then I didn't pick it up and write again for another year or two after that, just because of all the other in between stuff. And that in between a lot of times includes working on the book. So I'll be editing, I'll be getting it out to beta readers and doing proofreading. And then then I'll do the querying stuff, and then I'll do formatting for the ebook and paperbacks. And then I'll have to work with someone on graphics for the covers and things like that. So there's always been, I've never really stopped working on the books, per se, but writing is only a portion of that time. And then it's all the ancillary stuff around them. I'm very envious of Stephen King, who can just sit down and write and then pass it off to the team and have the team do all the other stuff. I want a team like that, because although I could be writing so much more, and the writing is absolutely the fun part. But as kind of a one-man band, you have to wear all the hats.
Yeah. What kind of books do you enjoy reading?
I try to spread it as much as I can. For a long time, I kind of had my Mount Rushmore of authors, Stephen King, Dean Koontz, John Saul, Anne Rice. Like those were my four main ones that I was constantly like reading all of their books. And they're all very different authors, but kind of in the same vein. So in the past several years, I've tried to continuously kind of spread my genre. So I'll read fantasy, I'll read, Game of Thrones, I'll read straight up, spy thriller, no speculative elements at all, like, the Jack Reacher books. And I read Westerns, I'll read a lot of like biographies and histories too. So I'll go back and read like the Killing books by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard, Killing Lincoln, Killing Kennedy, and kind of get some historical perspective. I try to spread it out as much as possible. The only thing I really don't read is like, Harlequin romance type novels, and not a lot of like literary fiction. Kind of like New Yorker type stuff, highbrow. I'm not that smart.
Yeah, makes two of us. Which books are what book is your favorite if you had to pick one, or if you had to have a Mount Rushmore of books? What would be on there?
Of other people's?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say my favorite book series ever is Stephen King's Dark Tower. I've read that probably 3 or 4 times all through, although I came in the middle and then had to backtrack a little bit. So I've kind of lost track of how many times I've read the whole series completely, but that's one I will probably read every few years. Just such a great series. Also, my favorite standalone book by him is 11/22/63. No surprise, time travel involved. So
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
I love the Ready Player One, Ready Player Two books by Ernie Klein. Ready Player Two just came out recently. They're just fun because they're so like pop culture, 80s love affair kind of books that right up my alley, spoke to my generation really well.
Yeah.
So those are some of my favorites. I loved Anne Rice's vampire and witch books, and when she starts combining those worlds together. But the vampires, Lestat and Interview with a Vampire, that series I fell in love with her worlds, her dark New Orleans voodoo kind of worlds.
Yeah,
so.
She captures that really well.
Yeah. And for straight up, just like shoot 'em up, punch 'em in the face. I love Lee Child's Jack Reacher.
Yeah,
those are fun.
Did you catch the adaptation of 11/22/63? Or
I did. Yeah,
Hulu?
on Hulu. Yeah.
What did you think about it?
I thought it was good. I always wonder whenever I see adaptations that stray from the book. I'm always like, why? So that one was odd that it started. Instead of going back to 1958, the main character goes back to 1960. That's weird. And then they introduced a whole new character, and this guy that kind of plays the guy who's kind of posing as his brother while he's living in Fort Worth. While in the books, he's kind of doing all of that alone. And that part I get. Having now done some screenplay adaptation myself, I get that you can't have whole sections of a TV show or a movie where the character is by themselves and most of it is covered through kind of internal dialogue. You almost have to have someone for them to talk to externalize that dialogue. So I get when you have to add a character like that, or you give the character a weird habit of talking to themselves all the time, or you have a narrator, something like that. But there are tricks to get around it. So I always wonder why things get changed up. But generally, I like the Hulu series. I only watched it once, read the book a couple times. Nothing replaces the book. The book's always better, right?
It is. It is.
But yeah, those are always. It's I as the kind of the technician in me that kind of disconnects from just enjoying something. Why do they do that? Oh, they added that character so he could explain this to that. But I liked them both. The don't get me started on the Dark Tower movie though. That one, I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
Yeah.
I
haven't
always
seen
say,
that one yet. Yeah.
oh, don't. It's 92 minutes. You'll never get back. I always say It should have said the Dark Tower instead of based on the book by Stephen King. It should say loosely based on the Wikipedia summary of the entire series.
Wow, that bad, huh?
Yeah, they chopped it up. That one, I'm still waiting for someone to do a really good adaptation of the Dark Tower series. That needs to be a TV show. It needs to be a Game of Thrones level, high quality TV show. That's what it's got to be, and don't make it into movies.
Yeah. So speaking of adaptations, I'm curious, what was it like having One Way adapted? I know they're still putting the finishing touches on the movie, but what was that like? Did you have a lot of creative control over that, or what was that process like? How did that develop? How did that kind of come to be?
It was really rewarding. The director and I met each other over social media. It was one of those things. He was one of those early people that found the first podcast and reached out to me and said, "Hey, I really like your podcast. It's going great. I think it's really good." And then in his signature, I noticed he had links to some of his film work. So I clicked on it and I really liked what I saw there. So we just started this correspondence back and forth. He lives in London. And so we just kind of started talking and struck up quite a friendship over the years. And he asked if he could shoot like a trailer, like a literary trailer out of one of my books. So I said, sure, that sounds like an awesome idea. So he actually shot some literary trailers for This Paper World. So cast it, did like fight training with the actors in it, and shot beautiful trailers, which are out on YouTube. And then he said, let's do something bigger. Let's do the Champion Saga as a series. So we started adapting the Champion Saga This Paper World as a movie. And then we realized it's probably too ambitious. So I said, hey, I have an idea. I get this other book One Way, might be a little bit smaller in scope and might be a little bit more practical for us to take on as an independent film. And so he said, yes, let's do it. So we pivoted. I wrote the screenplay adaptation for One Way, which as the author, it is funny. I'm as I just was critical about why do they have to change things? It's perfect in the book. But now going through that process, then you do realize, okay, this doesn't really fit the screen this way. So I've got to find some way around this. There's some really practical things. Like in the book, Jenny and Aaron have a nephew. Well, he informed me that to shoot with a child, there are all sorts of laws and things you have to do to have a child in it. So I said, all right, no nephew. Out he goes. So in the screenplay, there's no nephew. Barry's brother is announcing that he's going to have a baby. They don't have a baby. They don't have a child yet. So, all right, no kids. That was one practical thing I wrote out. And then just to kind of narrow down the cast, I wrote it. Barry has a father and a mother that have, small little parts in One Way. So I just wrote out the father and it's just the mom, just to kind of keep the cast a little bit smaller. And then for time, you're kind of looking, basically the rule of thumb is it's about a page a minute. So as I kind of was doing the adaptation, I realized we were going to run a little long. So I cut out a couple scenes here and there just to kind of, bridge it along. And then Jedediah was the tough one because he has a lot of internal dialogue and thoughts about his thoughts on time. And if you take someone out of the time stream and all the rippling effects that it has, and then his feelings about Jenny, that she's not right, that she shouldn't be there. But all of that is expressed internally in Jedediah in the book. He's got Rodney to bounce a couple things off early on, but he doesn't really share that interior stuff with Rodney. Rodney's just kind of a dumb, tool that he's using. So I had to figure out, how do I get all of this internal stuff out of Jedediah, especially when there are no more Rodney Rodney's not in the scenes with him.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge in writing some of that out too, and then just some of the interplay between what would have been an internal for Barry or Jenny or Van der Ven. I have to find ways to incorporate that into dialogue without making it seem like, ooh, here's some exposition that I need to explain that you already know, and I know you already know, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So there's definitely a craft to it that I learned throughout that process. So that was fun. And then casting was really cool because the director did some casting workshops. So we brought in groups of people and put them in scenes together. So we had, groups of people to play. There was people that were assigned, like a Barry and Jenny were assigned to work together, but there were like 3 groups of Barry and Jenny's. And so they would do scenes together, and then he would kind of mix them up a little bit. And he was like, I was watching over Skype and meeting the cast that way. So I wasn't involved in casting. I didn't have a final say in casting, but I kind of watch some of this workshopping going on. And then the director and I would talk about, what do we think about this person, that person? And just, it was fun. And then when they got to shooting, I would kind of get updates from their shooting set and the schedule. And then I'd get little snapshots and I'd get little video, but all this is going on over in the UK. So I can't really see it all. So that was fun, especially when I got to see rough edits of scenes. I was like, holy cow, these are people that I had in my brain a few years ago. And there they are in real life. And they're saying words are coming out of their mouth that I put on the page. That's cool. That's that was the most rewarding part of it. So it was good.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, that's I feel bad that right now the production is kind of on hold. The post-production pieces of it were kind of bigger, I think, than we thought, and more challenging. But the cast was just fantastic, and they're the people that I'm most proud of in this whole endeavor. Just how much they put of themselves out there to be these characters, and so they did a really good job too, and the crew too. The people working the sound and cameras and all of that.
I'm really anxious to see it. I hope I hope we're able to see it sometime.
I am too. Yeah. chat with the director periodically still, and I think we're going to try to, if nothing else, put together some scenes that we can put out for people, and maybe do some some trailers, just to kind of like bring interest to the book and the podcast. But it would be cool to see it on screen someday, for sure.
Oh, yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah. I know you use Twitter to communicate a little bit with your readers, but I know you also mentioned about that being something that you try and have quality quality conversations and relationships with those people. Does that help keep you going? And does that help kind of keep you motivated, like we were talking about?
100%. It's probably the main reason why there was a book 2 in the Champion Saga, and why there's a book 3, and why I keep writing. It's people that tell me that I'm doing a good job, and people that want to see that next piece of it. The one piece of feedback I get most about this Burning World, which is the second in the Champion Saga, is, when's the third one coming out? You left us on a cliffhanger. You gotta, So if it weren't for people that I interact with, I don't know how much of my own momentum would have stayed with all of this. It's certainly not the millions of dollars that are pouring in. It's not the red carpet events I'm invited to, because neither of those things are happening. But it absolutely is the people. It's the readers and people that I get joy out of crafting a story and then having them enjoy that story.
Mm-hmm. So as far as other forms of entertainment and inspiration for your books, do you get a lot of inspiration from certain types of movies or TVs or music? Does that kind of help you get ideas flowing and those ideas germinate?
I think so. Yeah, I think really every TV show and movie that I watch nowadays, probably, if not concepts from those things, just tonally, and like, oh, that was a great fist bump kind of moment in that movie. I want to write something like that someday. So those definitely help inspire, or at least fuel it a little bit. And music is definitely a big part of it. Like usually I'll kind of have a soundtrack that I write to. So a lot of times I'll put on, kind of John Williams, James Horner type movie scores to write, and it just puts me in a kind of a cinematic mind frame when I'm writing to the Star Wars theme. I'm just, moving along. Or like in the Champion books, for some reason, Foo Fighters became kind of like the anthem type music for this paper world and this burning world. So every time I write in this Champion world, I'll put on the Foo Fighters, and Dave Grohl and I and the guys are rocking out while I'm writing these fight scenes and all that stuff. So it's fun.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting that you went from movie scores to the Foo Fighters and that, but I guess it just kind of clicked, and that's what worked for you. So that's good.
Yeah. And I don't know how much if it influences tonally, if it influences the writing or not, but it just kind of puts me in kind of a headspace to, if I'm picturing a fight scene and the Foos are rocking out, then it almost like choreographs it in my head and sometimes I'll just let an album play, or sometimes I'll back up and I'll keep playing the same track over and over and over again. And that's kind of like the soundtrack to that scene as I was writing it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. When you start to develop or I guess in general, is what makes a good story? In your mind, what makes a good story? Like whether you're reading something, or you're writing something, or you're watching or listening to something, what do you look out for? What makes a good story?
I think to me, and I don't know when I came to this realization, whether it was already when I started writing or just it was there subconsciously, but I think it's no matter how fantastic the plot is, no matter what craziness is going on, whether it's magic or aliens or lasers or whatever, it's got to be happening to real people. And I think that to me is where I find a connection. Going back to my favorite movie of all time, Back to the Future, there's a kid that I could relate to. At the time I watched it, I was 10, but so Marty was older than me. He was a big kid. He was a teenager, but this kid would And he woke up and he had a messy room and he was late for school and skateboard and this fantastic adventure that he was on was first and foremost happening to a real person. And I think those are the things that speak to me. It's, I see it in movies that are when it's a fantastic thing that's happening, but it's just happening to people. Like if it's the fantastic thing or the effects or the plot contrivances first, and the people aren't really fully fleshed out underneath, I kind of disconnect from it. But if it's people first, and then even if it's a subtly fantastic thing, it doesn't have to be like the most amazing, fantastic thing, but it has to be fantastic to them. And then I'm on board and off we go.
Did you, or when you start to develop a story, you start to kind of get that tissue going. Do you do a lot of research on, like, for instance, on One Way, did you do research on like serial killers or did you do any kind of research on that, or did you just kind of go with it?
That one I kind of was winging it. I thought about it after the fact, but I put a lot of scenes in with Dr. Vanderven, who's a grief counselor, and I thought after the fact, like, ooh, there might be some people who really know something about therapy and about psychology that might read this and be like, that's crap. This is 100% wrong. Why would he put that in there? I was like, it's a book. It's fiction. I'm just going to go with it. So I didn't do any research on that one. With This Paper World, there's a road trip in it that kind of these characters drive up from Florida to New York City. And this was kind of early days of internet, like pre-Google Maps. So I actually went out and bought atlases so I could kind of like, okay, they could probably make it that far in a day. All right, so I'll put them around this city at this time.
Oh, wow, that's good.
And I would, look at AAA stuff and, pick out a town. And even this, so there's a town out, west of Dallas that there's one scene that happens in. I just kind of Google around, not Google Maps, pre-Google Maps, but to get like kind of static pictures of what that town looks like. And I'm like, okay, good, I can write to that. And so that I did that. And then when I did The Three Scrooges, which is kind of a twist on A Christmas Carol, I wanted to write it in kind of Charles Dickens language, so you could read The Three Scrooges almost as a direct sequel or prequel, depending on where you want to put them. Time travel, you can go to either way, but that it would kind of flow with the original Christmas Carol. So I read that book several times, listened to it in a couple different audio formats, so I could really keep the voice and to some extent, although I probably cheated a little bit, vocabulary of the times and make sure I was staying somewhat true to kind of Victorian era England. And I wrote another novella called Crush Depth, which happens in a submarine. And so I had to do a lot of research about kind of the mid-Atlantic ridge and at what depth do certain creatures go and at what depth would something break and how deep do we dive and kind of understanding that. But that was all like Google searches. It wasn't like hours in a library interviewing professionals. It was just like
Google.com. Yeah. But that's research now. It's not, I remember back going to the library and pulling out microfiche and that kind of thing. You need index cards and all that's over. So it's good that we can just type it in the search bar and find the answers.
It's the information age.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the things what are some of the surprising things that you've learned writing books?
Surprising things. I'm always surprised at humanity's capacity to want more stories. You think we've been around as a culture, as a society for thousands of years, and you'd think every story would have been told by now. Every movie that's ever worth watching would have been made by now. We can stop, right? We've got this library of like, I'll just go back and I'll just keep watching the original Star Wars over and over again. We don't need more. But people do want more. And people have this hunger for like, what's the next story? And sometimes we like stories that are familiar structures and remind us of something else. And okay, I got what I came for. I knew what I was looking for. I got a robot movie. I want to I watch Transformers. I got a robot movie. robots kicking each other and shooting lasers. Got it. I got my $7 worth, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And then other times you find people that kind of break the mold and kind of go, you thought you were in for this, but now I've twisted it and given you something new, something you didn't know you want. And that's been a great revelation to me over the years. That is, I think when I wrote One Way, I'm writing a time travel story. There's a million and one of these things out there, and they can only end one of a couple different ways. So what am I going to do with this? And people are just going to be like, yep, another time travel story. But people love it, and people always want more. So I'm happy because I've got more in my head. So I'm happy to give them more.
Exactly. Are there therapeutic benefits to modeling a character after someone you know in real life?
That's a good question, because I try to pretend like I don't model characters after people I know, because I don't want anybody reading it going,
Yeah, that's me.
That's me. You think that about me?
He killed me
What a
off?
jerk.
Wait, yeah.
I don't act like that. But the funny thing is people that do know me think I've modeled characters after them when I really haven't. Like my sister came to me after she read One Way, and my sister was a school teacher, and Jenny is a school teacher in the book. So she assumed I was writing about her and her husband. I was like, okay, if you want to think that, yes, sure. But you do have to. I do grab bits and pieces and parts of people and use them, but usually not in whole cloth. Like it's a characteristic of someone, or just a little quirk of their personality. But then I'll purposely either flip it, like I'll invert it. So if they were reading along, they go, "Wait, that's me. Oh no, that isn't me. That's the opposite of me." Exactly. Or it'll just be mishmashed with a few different people that I just kind of pulled in for inspiration. But and in general, you just there are plenty of people around and plenty of different personality types that I don't ever feel like I need to go, well, I've got to write my grandmother into the story and just give her a different name. It's just you can make characters. They're their own people, their own beings.
Yeah. I guess they evolve on their own through the story.
They absolutely do. That's the funny thing is I start with a kernel of who this character is, and it's usually like a touchstone that I'll go back to and kind of just to ground myself in who this character is. But that rudimentary start is usually just the beginning, and then they kind of, as you write them and as you let them have more dialogue with other people, and as you let them kind of have internal thoughts, they really do grow. And it's an odd thing, and I hate to sound like one of those hippy dippy writers that says it all just comes to me, and but it really, I don't know if it's metaphysical or mystical, but it is kind of a fun process to just let these characters kind of almost like little AIs in your head kind of pick up things and grow throughout your story.
Oh, it's an interesting way to view them, like their own little beings doing their own thing, and you just kind of go along with it.
Yeah, you steer them. You gotta, sometimes you gotta kill them, which is not fun, but but you do. It is you can't completely think you know everything about your characters when you start out. You got to be open for them to kind of do their own thing, because I'd be lying if I sat down to write a novel and say that I had all 110,000 words were already up here. I just had to get them out on paper. It definitely generates as it goes along.
I would imagine each of your books has a special place in your heart, and they're your creations. But was there one in particular that you enjoyed writing the most? And also, was there one that you had the hardest time writing? Or not the hardest time, but it took the most effort, I guess you can say?
It's funny. I get asked that question a lot, especially on social media. Well, which one's your favorite? I'll start with that one. And I usually have kind of a pat answer to that about, it's like picking your favorite kid or whatever. Yeah. But I was such a different person each time I wrote one of these that each time when I'm writing them, it was my favorite. Like, because it's always the latest thing you're creating. So you think you're always furthest along in your path at that time. So, I will always have a special place in my heart for This Paper World. I wrote it, 20 years ago at this point. I was a much younger person then, and my character was younger and more naive. And now that I've just finished my third book with him, and with that in that world, I can say that the last book I wrote was the most fun because it's the latest thing I've done, and it kind of ties up a trilogy. And but I could say that at any point about any one of these, like writing the Three Scrooges was fun because I was writing, Dickensian type prose, which was like a game. It was just fun to like try to mix and match words that way, and try to make it sound poetic and old timey, but at the same time still not like lose people because it's too archaic. So it's probably a good, very long non-answer to your question, but each book is your favorite at the time you're writing it.
Yeah. When you do create characters and have them evolving, do you find yourself relating to any of them, or is that something that you try to avoid, or you try and do?
Yeah, I mean, you do. I try to deny it, probably is a better way. Like a lot of people will point out, like when you read Stephen King books, just how many of them are writers. Like, oh, gee, who could he be thinking of when he's writing this middle-aged man that has a drug and alcohol problem and is also a writer at the time?
Yeah.
Could he be drawing on anybody he knows? So I try to go the opposite of that in some cases, but it's always there. Like Jim Hunt from Paper World was a young guy from the Northeast, from New England, that was going to college in Florida. Guilty. Barry was a young married man with no kids who worked second shift at a call center. Guilty. Like it creeps in. Like you got to write what you know, and you start with that as a base, and then you kind of go off from there. I talked earlier about writing about a plumber in space. I'm not a plumber, so unless I did a lot of research, I couldn't necessarily write about being a plumber. So probably none of my characters have been plumbers yet, but
yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe they could, though.
You never know. If you could sit down and have a conversation or have dinner with another popular author, who would it be? And just to ask them questions, or just to talk about anything you wanted to talk about.
That's a really good question. Boy, there's so many that come to mind because, and for very different reasons. Like I would think, like having dinner with Ernie Klein would be fun because he and I could geek out about 80s pop culture and 80s movies and just, fun stuff like that. But very different than in Ernie, who's a great writer. But I think he's only put out, 3 or 4 books at this point in his career, whereas Stephen King, who's put out 50, 60, who knows? But like you could have 2 very different conversations and 2 very enjoyable ones. So have me nail it down to one. Dean Koontz just seems like a really nice guy. Like anybody who likes dogs as much as he does has to be like super nice. Maybe it's all an act, but he just seems like one of those like swell guys you'd walk away from like with a smile on your face. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, it's a tough one. If you put a gun to my head, Stephen King. I grew up in Maine. I'm a Maine boy. He's a Maine boy. Let's go with Stephen King.
So what would you ask him? What would be something that you would want to get answered from someone like King in that conversation?
I don't know. That's a really good question because, I mean, I could ask him about the writing process or some of his, character, how's he come up with characters or whatever. But I feel like he's answered a lot of that in his own books and in interviews and things like that. I don't know. I'd probably just want to chat with him about regular stuff and then see where the conversation goes. That's a good question. This is a really good question, Steve. You stumped me.
At least I got you on one of them. What would your readers be? The ones that are familiar with you and that you communicate with. What would they be surprised to learn about you?
Oh, probably. how much of an insecure dork I am. I put on a big act when I put out my books and stuff, but deep down I feel like I'm faking it all the time. And one of these days I'm going to be found out. People are going to realize what a fraud and what a sham I am, and I will be a social pariah. But until then, I'll just keep faking
it. Yeah, I don't think that's really. I don't think that's too rare. I think most people feel that way deep down if they were being honest with you.
Yeah, I think so. We all feel like we're putting on a brave face when we face society, but then inside we probably think, say that right, and I'm gonna put my foot in my mouth. Or, yeah, we all fake it to a certain extent.
Yeah, we're all doing that. I think to some extent, all of us are. So before I wanted to set aside a little bit of time before I let you go to go over some spoilers from One Way.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So turn off now if you don't want to be spoiled. Is that the warning?
Yeah. So I wanted to be sure and set aside some spoilery talk from One Way.
Okay.
So the first question I have is actually from Luke's room. I think you saw his video that he did.
Yes.
On One Way. So his question was, he would like to know how hard it was to write the scene where Jen from the future had to leave Barry. It was so well written, and it made him wonder how hard it would be to be leaving his partner like that. The emotion was real, and he would also love to know how you found the inspiration to write those types of scenes.
That's a good question. Yeah. I guess I just really fell in love with them being in love with each other. And I tried to put myself in their position on what is it like to love someone and have someone that though it's a real world kind of love, they're husband and wives, it's not all hearts and flowers and romance all the time, but when you're in a scenario where there's, lives on the line, where there's moral jeopardy, what would it feel like to have to try, this person that you love more than anything else, more than you love yourself, is in danger, and you want to put yourself in between them and that danger. And that's kind of where a lot of that emotion came from. And part of it was like, I have to resolve this story and I've got to figure out how this ends. But at its core, it was, if a real husband and wife are out there and there's this madman trying to kill them, each one of them wants to keep the other one alive, even if it's at their own expense. So how would those emotions play out?
With Jen, especially the emotions that she goes through after losing Barry, the way that you described it was, I thought, really accurate. I thought you did a really great job with describing it, that sort of depression where you feel really heavy and you don't, it really got to me because it was so well described with her experience with that. Not that I've ever been in that position, but also the phone call that she made to her dad towards the end of the book. Gosh, that was a tough phone call, and it made you wonder, what would I say if I had to make that phone call? I mean, what was writing that like? How did you kind of develop that?
That scene was kind of a gift to me, because it was one of those, when I was doing my little blue index card and trying to match things up, I realized I was going to come a few chapters shy of making a couple of points meet. Mm-hmm. So I said, I've got to have something in between. And so that's when I thought of, well, she's leaving. Like, she's got to say goodbye to a life, and a life isn't just one person. And yes, she'd kind of disconnected from her teaching colleagues and stuff like that, but she's got a dad, and we'd established that dad early on in the book, when she and Barry were having a phone call about, going and visiting her dad. And I thought, one doesn't undertake this sort of thing without thinking about saying goodbye to people. So that's where that scene came about, and I just kind of put them, same with you, like, now that they're real people, now that Jenny has become this AI that lives in my head, now just let her talk to her dad, and just
Yeah.
let that scene play out. And that's kind of how that happened.
It's funny because when my wife first started reading the book, she was a few, like, you know, like 100 pages in, and she's like, I really don't like his wife. I really don't like Jenny. And at the end of the book, she loved Jenny. And I thought that was well done. Like you said, they're a normal couple. It wasn't perfect. They had their issues. You know, they had, you know, he was kind of, she was angry about his family, and it was kind of things that you would, in a real marriage, that you would go through. So I thought that was good, that it wasn't all perfect, and it wasn't, everything wasn't working perfect all the time. It was just a normal relationship. And that made it relatable to have them have those little kind of disagreements, or, you know, those kind of arguments. I thought that was well done.
Thank you. And that's that was core to me too as I was writing this, because when I started writing it, I was pretty much a newlywed myself, you know, young married couple with no kids in my own life. And I just remember like seeing, you know, TV shows and movies and reading books where the husband and wife were always like too cutesy with each other, too perfect. And then part of me is always like reflecting, like, my life's not like that. What am I doing wrong? Like, you know, and then I realized, no, that's not me being wrong. That's Hollywood and writers giving us a varnished version of what real life is. So I tried to keep it as real as possible and think about what are those little things that, you know, discussions and arguments that you have in real life, and put that in there. But also knowing that there were two things I wanted to accomplish that. You know, one was kind of just from a story perspective, that I wanted them to not have said, you know, I love you in their last moments talking to each other, so that was sort of like a catalyst for Jenny. It's something she was going to carry with her, and was kind of at the core of her grief, that she hung up on Barry in their last conversation. Yeah. She never said, I love you. And then the other one is just, you know, that though you're not always going to be hearts and flowers and roses, you will die for each other when it comes down to it. And that's real love.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, even until the very last few pages, I wasn't sure what kind of ending we were going to have. I thought it may not be a happy ending. I went back and forth with, I don't know if this is going to end well. I don't know how this is going to end. So I thought that was really well done too, as it kept me guessing, is this going to be a happy ending, or is this not going to be a happy ending? Did you consider?
You and me both.
Yeah. Oh, really? Did you? So you considered making it a
well,
not so happy ending?
I knew that future Jenny couldn't coexist in the if she ends up saving Barry, there's another Jenny at home sleeping in that bed who's going to wake up and not be a widow. So I wasn't going to Back to the Future it and have older Jenny like disappear, like, you know, Marty at the dance or whatever. So I was like, how am I going to resolve this? And then many people don't catch this, so I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, or too much of, but I actually laid Jenny's end in the beginning of the book. There's a scene when they're talking about going camping and going hiking, and they talk about that scene at the waterfall and how cold that water was. And they talk about a hiker or somebody's body being found near that waterfall.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
So not a lot of people do, but that was, so I knew, I was like, yes, I can, there we go. I can bring it around to that.
I didn't catch that at all. That gives me the chills to know that was in there. I'm going to have to go back and read it. Wow, that's really cool. Is it hard when you put something like that in your work, and you want more people to find? Is it hard to not kind of throw it out there a little bit and let people know, hey, you might want to pay attention to this?
Sometimes that one I will let people in on. Not many people have come to me with that one and go, wait, oh, that's her. But I kind of write that, and there's kind of a big reveal in the third book of the Champion saga that I started laying the breadcrumbs in from chapter 1 of This Paper World.
Oh, wow.
So that I almost write it from a like The Sixth Sense. Remember that movie with Bruce Willis where he was
he sees dead people?
Spoiler alert. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you watch that movie a second time, you're like, oh, the clues were there all along. And that's kind of what I was when I write those types of things in. That if anybody ever picks up One Way and reads it for a second time, maybe that will stand out and they'll go, oh, oh. And the same thing with This Paper World. That once you know what the big reveal is in book 3, that if you were to read the series again, you'd go, it was there the whole time. Like he was flaunting it in our face. Although that one, a few people have guessed. So the third book hasn't come out yet, but and I end the ending of book 2 on a cliffhanger, and there's a mystery reveal of someone at the end of book 2, and some people have correctly guessed who that mystery person is when they send me letters and stuff. So apparently they're very observant.
What does that feeling like when they kind of predict those things to happen? Is that a good feeling to know that they pay attention and they kind of guessed right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I love that because it means that it wasn't too obscure and it won't be a cheat when it does come out. That the clues were strong enough and that it wasn't just like, and in the third act here's this reveal that you never saw coming and didn't really deserve because you hadn't laid any plans for it.
Yeah.
So it's a good one.
When you were connecting that tissue with One Way, I know you're a big fan of time travel movies and time travel stories. Did you set a set of rules for time travel as you were going, or it kind of just to keep you honest with, because it's easy to cheat with time travel stories and it's easy to kind of bend the rules and to make it convenient for the story. And you didn't do that with One Way. So I was wondering, did you have rules that you had to follow when you were writing the story?
A little bit of it. Of course, growing up in the 80s, 90s, me and my geek friends were always talking about time travel rules, and there were actually 2 DeLoreans there at that time, and kind of picking apart all the different time travel rules. Is this Bill and Ted rules where you can say remember the trash can, or so I did have that kind of in my mind that there had to be kind of a baseline of rules, but I also wanted to keep it vague enough so that the story was not all about the mechanics of the time travel, that if you didn't ever establish fully the rules, you were okay with it because you were more about the characters and what was happening and how this was going to go down. I actually, although I will say I did break the rules with that last scene with Jenny, because if you remember, she could chronolocate, but she couldn't physically relocate. Like she had to go to the place and then chronolocate.
Right.
She couldn't be like halfway across the globe. So that was a bit of a cheat because Jenny ended up going from the cabin to where they were hiking. So that was, but I was like, I'm going to allow it because I want the emotional beat of this to be in here. And if someone calls me on breaking the rules, I'll take that criticism heartily.
How did you come up with the idea of chronolocating? Was that something that you researched? Because it seems like you put in some research into that, because I think you described it really well, and you set the table for how it works in that world. Is that something that you kind of thought out and you took some time to think of, or did it just kind of come out? It
just came. I just kind of thought it out and let it. After watching decades of time travel, and Quantum Leap and Back to the Future and Doctor Who, and I said, well, I'm just going to make up my own rules. And actually I started and I didn't know. And remember, it all started with that kernel of guys at a gas station at night pumping gas, and the time traveler comes to him. So I always knew that I was going to reveal how she got there at some point, but I had no idea when I started writing this book. I was like, all right, well, it's going to have something to do with Vanderven. And well, he can't be doing it alone. So maybe he's got this gaggle of scientists, and are they built? Is it a time machine? No, it's not a time machine. That feels weird. Is it a portal? So I just and I went with him being a therapist and using that psychological element, that kind of like consciousness is the thing that's driving all this, not a blue sparky laser ray or something.
Yeah. Speaking of time travel and entertainment with time travel in it, a little bit of a tangent, but have you seen Dark on Netflix?
No, I haven't.
Oh, if you from this conversation, you will love Dark. It is a German. It's a German series. It's 3 seasons long. So there's subtitles in it. But if you love time travel and you love the '80s, you'll love Dark. It is so well done. It is really, really good. So
That is going in my queue right now.
as
Actually,
if
just
when you have time, yeah.
for the first time recently, I watched. There's one on Amazon Prime. It's a mockumentary called "The History of Time Travel,"
Mhm.
which I thought was an interesting take on it as well, and it was fun to watch. And that was one. Have you ever seen that one?
Mm-mm.
It's
No, I
basically
haven't.
conducted through it's basically like looks like a documentary, so it's a series of interviews and then some recreations of like actors acting out what they're describing in the interview. But if you watch it, like you pay attention to everything that's in the frame at all times, because it's really an interesting narrative that goes along throughout the documentary as well.
I'd be interested to see to hear what you think of Dark, and if kind of how you if you kind of I don't want to spoil it, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it after you
I
watch
will
the first few episodes.
I will definitely reach out and we can have a good chat about it.
Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be awesome. And we kind of already. I had a question for you about keeping the timeline straight. You've already answered that one for me, which that was something that I wondered as I was reading it. Is how do you keep all these lines straight? That was, and I did have a question about Jedediah because I want to think that there were because he knew Jenny something wasn't right, that there was something wrong with and he was so determined to set things in his mind, to set things right. Were there other powers at play there? Were there other forces at play, or was he just in tune somehow with what was going on?
Um, I want to be careful how I answer this because there may be more books, more stories coming.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
that's
but yeah, he's definitely on the right track. He like Vander Ven does have a sense of time and an innate sense of this nature.
mhm.
So it was not just the fact that he's a psycho killer psychosis, but that he's got a feel of this. Vander Ven's got a feel of it, which is why he can find these candidates um, and that all plays together. And there might be something bigger at play
Okay.
if I ever do decide to pick up the journey.
Yeah, that was my next question. Actually, is will there be more stories in this universe, in this world of One Way?
In my head, I have 2 more books planned. I
Oh
think it could
wow.
be a trilogy. I already have the names. Wrong Way and Dead End would be the next 2 books, and it would really springboard off the little epilogue scene at the end with Vander Ven and his new patient, whose wife was killed by a drunk driver, or his family was killed by a drunk driver. So
Yeah.
that will start the next sequence of events off if I ever get around to writing it.
It's funny because my wife flew through the book and she was finished in I don't know what 2 or 3 days, and it takes me a little bit longer because of work and everything else. But she was dying for me to finish it because when I finished it, we had this big long conversation about how things may be connected with the epilogue. Because when I've read the epilogue, I thought there's some kind of connection here with Jedediah, or somehow it's connected. And we sat down and we were trying to figure out how it would be connected, but we couldn't find a way. But I was convinced that there was something connecting everything. So I know I might be way off, but
Nope.
okay, all right,
There could be more. There could be more. I kind of wanted to write it that because in the when you're writing and when you're trying to get publishing up and running, there's only so many decades of your life you can invest in a series if nobody's picking up the thread, if publishers aren't aren't going to pick you up on it. You don't want to be writing the 7th book of your series that no one is going to publish. So I wanted to do a standalone. So in my head, the whole point of One Way was it would have a beginning, middle, and end, and it could live on its own. But by the time I got to the end, I was like, "Ooh, this has legs.
Yeah.
There could be more to this." So I'm trying to like resist the urge, but there sometimes stories just keep knocking at the back door of your brain and going, "Hello, remember me? I want to be told. Can you write me?" So
Those
maybe,
AIs, yeah,
maybe.
they come knocking.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again for spending time to chat, and again for helping support our new book club that we're trying to get going. So that was very generous, and I do appreciate the offer. And it was an awesome book. I loved it. It was I wasn't really I try not to read the synopsis of any book. So when Jenny showed up, I was like, what's going? It gave it kind of. I'm glad I didn't read the synopsis too. I didn't really pay too much attention because I like to go into things blind. But when Jenny showed up, it was just, what is going on? Like, because it was a good moment.
Awesome. So, I'm glad it worked. So
I'll let you go. But how can people find you? Is there a way that people can find you online? And and you mentioned the 3rd book and the trilogy coming out. When can we be expecting to see that, or what can we do to support it and to get the word out?
Oh, great question. So you can, I'm on Twitter primarily. I'm at World of Jeff Lane is what I call the promotional account, where I mainly, use it to kind of promote the books. But I have writer Jeff Lane, which is kind of my dorky, just be funny or try to be funny. I don't know if I really am, but so that's so you can find me on Twitter there. I am on Facebook, but I can never remember the name of it. I think it's Jeff Lane Fiction and Media, something like that. And I'm not as active on Facebook as much as I probably should be. But if you're more of a Facebook person, reach out. I'll certainly interact there. In terms of the 3rd book in the Champion Saga, I've got it out to beta readers right now who are going through helping find my myriad of typos and grammatical issues and just tell me how the story's hitting them. So as soon as I get it kind of polished up, I'm going to start that cycle again where I reach out to literary agents. And now instead of pitching a single book, I'm going to be pitching a trilogy of books, a series of books, and see if that gets me anywhere different. But if not, then I will do what I have always done, is just put it out myself. And I think I owe that to the fans of this book. I wrote it in 2000, 2001, and I put it out in podcast in like 2009. And so I've got people who have been waiting for this 3rd book for a long time, and I kind of owe it to them. So no matter how I get it out there, it is going to be out there, and it will kind of bring that series to a nice landing. For now, there could be more. And then who knows what the next adventure will be. I do.
Awesome.
But,
it's good to keep us guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody who has read One Way and they want to support the other books, jump right into the Champion Saga, this Paper World, this Burning World, and then hopefully soon this Champions World.
Awesome. Well, if I can do anything on my end to help with the new book, let me know. I'll do whatever I can do to help and get the word out, and to let people know about it, if that'll help at all with the publishers and things.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
But like I said, thanks again for taking a few minutes of your. It's been almost 2 hours. I was surprised. It's flown by. So I appreciate you taking time out of your evening to sit and chat and just have a conversation.
Anytime, Steve. Anytime.
Yeah. And let me know after you watch Dark. I wouldn't mind having sitting down and talking about it and hearing your thoughts, and whether it's after the first season or after the first few episodes, I'd be really curious to see your thoughts on it.
We'll have a good old geek out about it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's right up my alley. So I'm ready for that anytime.
Perfect. Awesome. It's a date.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, thanks again, Jeff. I really appreciate your time and taking a few minutes to chat.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.